Welcome to Comotion's Complete Guide to Decorative Stamping. During the next 90 minutes, you'll learn how rubber stamps can enrich your life. You'll see that stamps can be the most versatile tools in your creative repertoire. This video will teach you the basics of stamping and then show you how to use your stamps as tools in 3 distinct areas: stamping on paper, stamping on fabrics, and stamping on shrink plastic. We'll show you how to create beautiful, personalized note cards for all occasions, how to use stamps in your fabric decorating projects, and how to make exciting, lightweight earrings, pendants, buttons, and more with inexpensive shrink plastic. There's something here for stampers of all ages and at every level of experience. So sit back and relax, and let us show you some neat things about stamping. Each segment is color-coded with a frame of color. This is to help you find the area of the tape you need when using fast forward and reverse. Basic information has a blue frame. Paper stamping has a peach frame. Fabric stamping has a green frame. Shrink plastic has a red frame. If you're already an experienced stamper, you may want to skip over the basic information and fast forward to the section of most immediate interest to you. Refer to the video box for the color coding of sections. Hi, I'm Bonnie Montgomery. In this first section, we're going to show you how to get a good stamp image every time. We'll show you the importance of starting with clean stamps, and you'll also get a brief introduction to ink and pad types. We'll also show you some beautiful things done with rainbow ink pads. Here with me now is Vesta Abel of Comotion Stamps. Now, Vesta, you're not only a designer and an artist, but you've been stamping for 12 years, so I'm sure there's all kinds of things you can teach us today.
Yes, and I'm going to show you everything I know about rubber stamping, and we're going to start with the basics.
Okay, the first thing we need to do, what is it?
You always want to work on a smooth, flat surface. It's
right.
very important because I'm going to show you a little demonstration here of an uneven surface and what happens.
There's just a napkin under there.
See what happens if you don't have a smooth, flat surface, okay?
All right,
Look at
definitely
the
a difference, and
Okay,
that's
so
all we have to do.
It's critical to have a clean surface and a smooth surface when you're starting.
Okay, the next thing we need to
Okay.
do.
The next thing is you always want to have clean stamps when you start.
All right.
Okay, and if you were just using one color ink pad all the time, it wouldn't be so important. But there's such an array of colors that you're going to want to use, so you want to have a clean stamp every time. Now I'll show
What
you,
would happen?
I'll give you
yeah.
a little demonstration of what will happen here if you have a dirty stamp when you start. Okay, now we're putting black ink onto another color. If this had been a stamp that you had been using on another project and you didn't clean it and it still got black ink on it, you can see what would happen if you go to a different color pad. And not only will it ruin your ink pad, but you don't get a
black.
good and you don't get a
pink.
good true color.
Okay, so that's very important.
So we want to always clean our stamps off. And depending on what type of ink you use, then you're going to use different types of cleaners.
Okay, what types of inks are there?
Okay, there's dye-base inks, there's pigment inks, there's permanent inks, fabric ink, and the first 2 I mentioned are going to be cleaned with either water, or you can use glass cleaner, or you can use rubbing alcohol.
All right.
Whatever
and those
you
were the
want.
dye base and?
Pigment inks.
Okay, that we clean that way.
Right.
And you're going to
They're
show
very
us
easy cleanup.
specifically how we do this.
Right. And if you're using a permanent type of ink, then you need to use a solvent-based cleaner.
Okay.
Which we're going to go into that later.
Okay, you're going to show us
But
how
for
we're going to
now,
clean our stamp here that
yes,
we've
you can just
put
have
black
a
on.
paper towel on your work surface and just clean it off. You're just needing to clean the surface of this stamp.
Okay, just kind of dab and rub.
Right. So you don't have to scrub real hard or anything. You just want to get that surface ink off of there. And then you want to, now we're going to also go on to the different types of stamps that there are.
Okay, but basically this pad has been ruined for us because we've got the black on
as you
there.
can see, this side still is open, and you
But we
can
don't
use that. And you can try to get that off of there if you could, but you can see what happens.
Boy.
It really,
So it's very important to clean those
Very
stamps.
important.
Would we clean them after we have used them, or can we do we clean
it's
before we
generally a
use them
good
again?
idea, because then you don't have to worry the next time if you're getting all your stamps out and your ink pads out. what might happen is you forget whether or not you cleaned it,
Right.
and then you go and you stamp it on there and you've ruined the pad. You don't want to do that.
All right, well, let's get a clean pad out then to work
Okay.
with. And you're going to show us next what we need to know about inking.
There are a lot of different types of inks and stamps, but
Okay.
anyway, as you're looking at these stamps here, you can see that this surface has a solid design. It's totally filled in. This butterfly over here is basically line drawing,
Okay.
so it's open. So it requires a different amount of ink when you're inking it. Now
Okay.
this one, that needs a lot of ink, it has to cover a lot of surface. You want to make sure that your stamp is getting lots of ink on it.
So you're basically just
So we're
dab,
just
dab,
going,
dab, dabbing.
Yes, because if you just lightly ink that, just say you use real light pressure and you're not getting very much ink on it, and you stamp it, see what can happen. Where if you go back, get a lot of ink on it and use firm pressure,
Oh, that's nice.
look
Yeah.
at the difference.
Okay.
You know.
All right.
Okay, now
And
that's,
when we use our line,
then you don't need quite as much pressure and not as much ink because you don't have as much surface that's picking up ink.
okay.
But you still want to go straight down when you stamp. You don't want to rock back and forth to get a smooth, clean image. And, okay, these are just our regular size stamps like that. Now, the same things apply to little tiny stamps like these mini ones here. There again, we have 2 stars here. One is a solid surface on there, and the other's a line drawing. Same thing, you want to get plenty of ink on there, go straight down with it,
Okay.
and you can see what
A
happens
little less
there.
pressure when the stamp is smaller.
A little less.
More pressure.
This is another tip to remember all the time. Have scrap paper right there. You've got your nice stationery that you're going to make cards on, but you want to take your scrap paper and get the feel of each stamp before you start working with it. Well, this needs a little less, or this needs a little more.
Okay.
And when it looks perfect on the scrap paper, you're ready to make a card.
All right.
Okay?
So more
So-
pressure when we have solid
Right. And more
image,
ink. And more ink.
more ink, and less pressure when we have an outline or smaller.
Exactly.
Okay, well that makes sense. All
Okay.
right, you're going to show us
And
this
also with a line drawing stamp like this, well, you don't want to rock any stamps, but you can see what happens if you don't, if you're too,
one. You get a double
jerky with
image.
it, yes.
Yeah, so it's straight
So,
down.
do that.
I'm going to use this one. This because I love
Okay.
this little paw stamp. And I would have a tendency just to push down once, go on the paper.
Right.
And yeah, I've got
And
it's kind of all over the place there.
Right.
So I want to dab, dab, dab. And I'm going to put it this way. Can I use too much ink?
not unless the ink pad has been over inked.
Okay.
And if it's just one that you've bought in a store, in most cases they're not.
Okay, and I'm not rocking, I'm pushing straight down.
Right.
And dun-da-da.
Great.
Now, this is a felt pad, correct? Are
Right.
there different types of pads?
Yes, there are. Even in the dye-base ink, sometimes you'll find them on a foam pad.
Okay.
And there again, they take a different pressure as you're using them. That's why you need to practice on paper first. See how
Okay.
your inks work and how it's working with your stamp.
All right, here I am. I'm just going to keep trying a little bit. All right, you have
Great.
another image there, and
Very
you can
good.
see that he's going across the whole page.
Perfect.
All right, now this was something different.
Yes, now this design here, as you can see, has more design up at the top and it narrows down to a little fine point. So as you're stamping that, and you're getting, this is also a line drawing, so it doesn't need as much ink. Then when you go to stamp it like this will probably still turn out well. But what can sometimes happen is that if you press too hard like that down at that end, you could get a smeared image down at where the line is delicate like that. So you want to just be careful. Make sure you're stamping. Look at every stamp and kind of figure out what kind of pressure you need.
Because there's more design at the top of this iris, you would want to put more
A little
pressure
more pressure
there,
at that end if
and
possible.
then relax
Right.
a little as you go down
Exactly.
to the smaller one. Again, it sounds like we have to remember to practice, practice, practice
Right, right.
on another sheet beforehand.
It
and see
sounds
what we
like
can
we're
get.
going through a lot right now, but all of this will just be natural as you're doing your stamping. And the whole idea of making sure you go over all these details like this is then you're going to have beautiful cards. You're not going to waste a lot of stationery. And doing a little pre-planning and have beautiful cards to show for it.
Now you have a jumbo stamp over there. I want to make sure that we take a look at this.
Remember we were talking about getting plenty of ink and using lots of pressure. Well, when you're using a jumbo stamp, you're going to have to even rub it all over the pad like this to make sure it gets plenty of ink on it. You might even want to press the top of it like that. And then when you stamp it, see how you want to press.
Get all of the edges in there.
Right.
For the whole image.
And the whole thing turns out perfect. If you don't, and you think you're getting it inked all over, you're not, because it's so big and there's different levels in your pad. So by going like this, you're assured of getting ink all over the entire surface.
Okay.
As you can see how that is.
Well, we'll keep that in mind then.
And the jumbo stamps especially need a terrific amount of pressure compared to these little stamps.
All right. Well, so these are basically the basics, Vesta, that we want to keep in mind. And then as we keep continuing to do more complicated things with our stamping, we'll always have that nice base of knowing the basics. So these inking and stamping tips will apply to all the stamping you do, whether on paper or wood or fabric, plastic or whatever. So let's recap. The basic stamping techniques. Work on a smooth, hard surface. Second, start with a clean stamp for true colors and clean pads. We saw what could happen if you don't. 3, tap several times on the pad of ink. Now, let's look at the inking pressure. Remember, felt pads, heavier pressure, foam pads, lighter pressure, old pads heavier, new pads lighter. Stamp straight down with steady, firm pressure. Remember, don't rock or twist your stamp. Now let's look at the stamping pressure one more time. Large stamp, remember, heavier pressure. Small stamp, lighter pressure. Solid design heavier, open design lighter. Every stamp is unique, so practice, practice, practice on a scrap of paper to discover how much pressure you need and where. Okay, now we need to talk about the different kinds of ink that you mentioned, two specifically. The dye base ink
and pigment inks.
Okay.
And it used to be really easy when you went out to get ink pads because there was only one type and it wasn't confusing like it might be now.
And we had red and we had black.
Right. Very simple. And now, since decorative stamping has become so popular, there's all kinds of specialty inks out there. And we're going to try to clear up some of the misconceptions about the different types of ink so that you understand what you're using. Okay, with dye-base inks, these are the most common ink pads that are out there available on the market still. Some of the advantages of them are they're inexpensive, they're quick drying, they're easy to find, they're easy to use and clean, so they're good for children, for instance.
Right.
And you clean up with either water or window cleaner or rubbing alcohol.
Okay. And we've been using the dye base so far.
Right.
That was the pad that we were using. So we'll just see how easy this is and how quickly it dries. Now some things we don't want the ink to dry quickly.
Right.
So
which
we wouldn't
will
use the dye base.
That's right.
But if we wanted to, oh well, I didn't do it.
Right.
I should learn my basics
Learn
again
your
here.
basics.
Okay, I remember what I did. I have to tap, 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 get enough ink and push
good
it
pressure.
down. Okay, see how important those basics are?
See?
Okay, anyway, we're showing that it will dry quickly.
Right.
That's what makes it good for the kids.
Right.
What are some of the things that are drawbacks for a dye base?
They fade more quickly. They don't fade right away, but let's say you make a birthday card or something, it's fine for that, or something that's not going to be exposed to strong sunlight, or they can even fade in
just regular
lighting too, so that's one of the...
And that's already dry.
Right.
Now if we have a dry base ink, when we're going to the store, how do we know to choose dry base? I mean, how can
Most
we tell?
of them don't actually say on the top of the pad. In that case, you're more apt to find that it is the dye-base ink.
Because it's more common, they just don't put it down.
They just don't put that down on there. It's if you're going to get a specialty ink like the pigment ink or permanent ink or fabric ink, it will say that on the package.
All right. Now,
So.
You had told us before that we can actually re-ink our pads.
Right, and you can buy bottles like this and match up the color. And you want to stick to, if you're using dye-base inks, you want to make sure you're getting dye-base ink refill.
Okay.
Because if you try to mix different types of inks in one pad, say you get a hot pink that's in a pigment ink and think you can use it on your dye base, you'll ruin the pad.
Okay, so we want to keep
very
that in mind.
important to
All right.
get the proper inks.
Tell us about pigment inks then.
Pigment inks they have a lot of advantages. The colors that you see, for instance, on here are what you get.
Okay.
You can, if they're on a clear top like this, you can see the color. They don't fade in strong sunlight, or some of the other, they're slow drying, which we haven't gotten to that yet with embossing, but they're wonderful for doing that. The colors don't bleed in the pad. You can see these colors are right next to each other and they don't bleed together.
And do we clean up the same way?
You use the same cleanup method.
Okay.
You can either use water or glass cleaner or rubbing alcohol to clean them with. They're very slow drying, so they will smear if you stamp them and then immediately try to touch it, it will
so
smear.
If, let's say, we were doing cards, we would want the dye-base ink, because that would go quickly. If
that's all you're going to do.
Right.
Right.
Because we want it to dry quickly as we're going through a bunch of cards,
Right.
but maybe we're doing something more fancy or doing some of the things that we'll be showing a little later in the tape, and that's when we want to use this pigment ink.
And also, these won't dry in the pad.
Okay.
They last much longer.
Once again, do we want to refill the
You
pigment
can,
pad with pigment ink?
after you've used them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, they will need ink after a while. Another tip to remember too on the pads is to store them upside down so your inks flow to the surface.
Okay.
And they last quite a while.
All right, so we have dye-base ink and we have pigment ink.
Right.
All right, let's go through some of the basic things that we want to remember about those two different kinds of ink. First of all, we have the dye base. It's inexpensive, it's the most common and easy to find. It's quick drying, it's good for the kids, it won't smear. It's easy to use and it's easy to clean up. And also the colors will bleed in multicolored pads, so you want to keep that in mind. The colors fade over time, they're not light fast. And remember, refill only with dye-base ink. Now, the pigment inks. They're slower drying, but they're great for embossing. We're going to show you that later. The colors won't fade. The colors will stamp just as they appear in the pad. The colors will not bleed in multicolored pads. They have a longer shelf life than dye inks, and they can be used on fabric if embossed with clear powder. And remember to refill only with pigment inks. Vesta, now tell me about the rainbow pads.
Okay. Now, now here's a pad that has 3 different colors in it.
Okay.
Okay. And we're going to kind of stamp right between the 2 of those.
Oh.
And see how you have a variegated look there? Now,
so that's a rainbow pad.
Right.
Okay.
Now over here you can see examples of things that have been done with them on cards, stickers, and on bookmarks.
Okay. That rainbow look gives it such a dramatic feel.
It gives
I like it.
a much more professional look to your cards.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so we need some tips now on how to make this work for us.
Okay. Now, if you're just stamping in one area like this, and you're going back and forth, you can stamp all day without cleaning your stamp. You can just keep going like that.
With the 2 colors.
Right,
Okay.
and see how you get the effect like that? But let's say now you want to go to this end and use that ink. You want to wash your stamp off.
Okay, for the red and purple.
Right. Now we can go down to this end.
And still dabbing like we learned at the
Exactly.
beginning.
And the reason we're doing that again is because we've got a solid stamp there that needs lots of ink.
Oh, I suppose that would, oh, that's
See
nice,
how-
that's pretty. Yeah.
Right.
I suppose that would be different. We were talking in the beginning about the difference between the line drawing and
Exactly.
the drawings that are filled in.
You have so much more surface here to add ink onto.
Well, let's take a
So-
look at what this would look like if we did a
Okay.
butterfly with the line drawing. And I'm imagining we'll still see the colors,
Oh yes.
but they just won't be, as you said,
You don't need as much,
dramatic.
and also you don't need as much ink, and you don't need as much pressure.
Okay. We can still see it. It
See
is
how
pretty.
beautiful?
Right,
Yeah.
it is pretty, but you're right.
It stands out more with the solid.
Okay.
Okay.
That's easy
Now,
enough.
some other points to look at here too. Now let's do where we're doing the light and dark stamping with that all as well.
Light and dark.
See how not re-inking? And your colors
So we
on
can
there,
use
too.
that to give us a fun effect if we want to. It's
Right.
another artistic thing that we can use
Right.
with the stamps. They don't always have to be nice and dark.
Right,
Only when we want
right,
them to be.
exactly.
Okay, now these come in all different kinds of colors.
Right.
Correct?
Here you can see this is a pad that you would buy in a store that's already got those colors in it like that. And there's different types of rainbow pads too. Some do come with the dye base, but these are pigment inks.
Okay.
That we're
Here
using
we have an example of we can
Right.
get all across here.
a lot of different colors on there.
Okay.
And you can either stamp between the two like this, or you can, a lot of these stamps will fit by going back and
just
forth like
using
that.
the one color.
And you get many different colors in the one pad.
Okay. Now I'm noticing one thing. We've been using these medium size and small ones.
Right.
What happens if we have our big guy right there?
What's wonderful about these ink pads too is you notice that this is sticking up on the pad. And most ink pads, it's down inside of it, like you can see
Here,
here,
we'll show
for
the
instance.
difference.
See how that's in there?
Oh, this is a rainbow also.
Right, and you can only use small stamps that would fit on the inside of that. In other words, you couldn't use a jumbo stamp on that. But because this is raised up in the pad like this, you can either lay it down like that and take your jumbo stamp and go across it
Oh.
and ink it that way, or you can also go like this and pick it up and
That looks easier.
yeah.
I'd probably
Well,
do it
this
that
way you can
actually.
see that it's getting inked all over it.
Sure, and you can even see on the stamp before
Right.
you even stamp it that we have the
Right,
different colors.
that we got the different colors
Okay,
on there.
good.
And we'll even stamp that on there.
All right. Now I want to also show something that you have out here that you're going to have to tell me about. These are
Okay.
great. Look at this.
This is another thing that's wonderful about when you get the refills like this, and these come with a dry pad. Let's say you can see a big variety of these rainbow pads, but they don't have the colors you want.
Right.
What if you need to have colors that are for your school colors, or a design, a pattern in there that you want in there? You can make your own. So you can take a dry pad like this, pick out any color combination you want, and squeeze them right into the pad. And then you just dab back and forth. We'll put this color into there. And it'll just go down into
Just
there.
soaks it up.
Right.
And you can make your own.
And we'll put another color here. And see, they don't bleed together. So you can put them in there like that.
And specifically now you are using which kind of ink?
This is the pigment ink.
Pigment ink.
Now you can also make a rainbow pad with the dye base inks, but you have to remember that they do bleed together in the pad.
All right, I want to
So-
use this just to show
Okay.
your beautiful combination
Back
here.
and forth with
Oh,
that.
that's right, we're still dabbing.
Right.
All right.
You may have a little bit too
We might
much
have a
ink
lot
on
of
the
ink
yeah
here, but
to
we'll
begin.
see. Oh.
No, it turned out beautiful.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And that's with a little tiny.
Now, if we
pad,
didn't
too.
dab when we have these rainbow colors and we just went down and straight over, would that
Right.
make a difference in our
It does.
image?
There again, do you remember when we were doing where I said if you just lightly touch it and you stamp it, it had a faded look to it? Also, let's start with a completely clean stamp again. We'll make sure we clean that off real good. And let's say you just stamp like this.
And you didn't dab, you just
And you
stamped
didn't
right
do
down.
that. And also, with a clean stamp and a pad that's never been used before, you'll have a stark line between the colors. And
Okay.
it doesn't look really pretty. But what you want to do is you want to go back and forth slightly. It's okay for them to mix a little bit on there, and they're still not bleeding together. But what you're trying to achieve is a blended effect across there. You see that?
Sort of a shading from the
A
one tone
shading.
into the other.
So it's It's real important to go back and forth on it like that.
We can be very creative making
Right.
our own ink pads and then
And
just designing here.
Like 36 different colors, so you can mix any combination together you want.
Okay.
You
Now,
might-
you were going to show us how we can
Yeah,
make
with-
our own with the
With the dye base inks.
dye base. We have been using
Okay.
pigment.
Now, since they do bleed together, you want to start with light colors first when you're putting them on the pad.
Okay.
And you would want to put mostly the light color because dark colors are going to bleed into the light and overtake it.
Okay, so light
So-
colors first.
Right. Let's say we're going to put 3 different colors on this pad. Okay, we're going to start with hot pink. See how that just soaks right into there? The dye base inks are very thin and almost like water. They just bleed right into there. So we're going to have most of the pad with this lightest color. And we're going to put purple.
So when we're putting these on, do we basically want to have a section of this color, a section of this?
Right.
Just as you're doing, we don't want to get fancy with our colors on the pad, making patterns or anything like
Oh,
that.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, because with this type of ink, it's not going to stay there. It's going to bleed around into it.
Okay.
Now, you can do that with the pigment ink.
Right, that's
as you
what I
can
was showing
see.
before.
We made squiggles there, and we'll stamp that to show you what it looks like.
Right, okay, so that's the
And-
pigment ink. We can do this fancy stuff.
Right.
Dye base, we want to stick
You
with
want to
just
pretty
the color.
much, pretty much.
Okay.
And then the last one, we'll put another color. And the reason we're making a jumbo pad like this is so that you can use your jumbo stamps with it. You can use small stamps on these pads, but you can't, the reverse is not true.
Right.
With
Can't
this
use-
jumbos on the small pads. So now after a period of time, this is going to bleed into here. So then it's going to be about the same ratio.
I see.
So,
Okay. Well, that
and it's
looks
as
easy
simple
enough.
as that. And then you want to always re-ink with the same inks. Never try to mix pigment inks onto your dye base
Okay.
pad or vice versa.
All right, just we want to keep that
And there
separated.
you go.
All right, very good. We were going to show how to stamp with this one. I have to see what
Right.
this looks like. So I'm going to use my paw again. And I'm still dabbing even though
Still
it's designed
dabbing,
like
exactly.
this. Dabbing. Can you tell this is my
And
favorite
back
stamp?
and even lifting it up and
Like
yeah,
this?
that's good. Yeah, I think that's your favorite stamp.
It is, obviously. All right,
Okay,
is that
that's
good?
good.
All right, my pressure down. Let's hope this works. Oh,
See how neat
okay.
that
Yeah, I
is?
see that it isn't necessarily just the one color to another. You
Right.
can almost see the squiggle in there. Well,
Right.
that's fun. All right, very good. We
Try the black and silver. You see.
Oh, all right. I'm going to let you
Now
do that
see,
one.
in this one now we have a metallic.
Let me use that. Oh, metallic.
A
Okay.
metallic ink mixed in with black.
Ooh. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, see how that has a real
A different
metallic
kind of
look in there?
shading. Oh, well, this is great.
And you don't generally find those colors like that in a
Uh-huh.
pad. So now you can be as creative as you want to be.
All right, remembering to clean in between and
Always
remembering
clean.
to practice first.
Right.
Very
always
good.
practice.
Okay, Vesta. And that wraps up our discussion of ink pads and how to make good impressions. Now let's move on to the next section where we'll show you a couple of simple design tricks and introduce you to embossing powders, watercolor markers, glitter glue, and more. We'll make some beautiful cards and learn all about stamping on paper. In this section of the tape, we'll show you how to create note cards, gift tags, party favors, and a lot more. All right, Vista, we have a lot to get through, so let's
Right.
get started with this one. What is this technique?
That's called light and dark stamping.
Okay.
And the way you achieve that is you take your stamp, ink it really well, and you stamp it once, then stamp it again, and you get a lighter image.
All right.
Okay?
Well, that's simple enough. All
See
right.
how you get
And
that
we have an
effect?
example of 2 different cards that you've done here. And that's just very simple.
Yeah, it's
to
very
just get
easy
some
to
shading.
do, and yet it gives you dimension to your cards.
Okay, so let's see then. The next thing we want to look at is this effect where we've got one shell that looks like it's in front of another one. What do we
Right,
call this?
and that's very easy to do. It's
What's this technique called?
that's called overlap stamping.
Okay.
Okay, and so that I can be real clear about that, I'll show you. Ordinarily, if you want to stamp an image like this, and you want to put another one behind it to make it look like there's a grouping. See what happens there? It gets muddy and confusing.
Yeah, you can tell
looking.
here in the middle that it's two.
Right, you see the other one through it. But let's say you do this. You make a paper mask. You stamp your piece of pottery or your pottery on a piece of paper and cut it out with scissors. And you want to cut right up to the design, carefully, right up to the design. Because what we're going to do now is you take your stamp it like that.
Okay.
And then you're going to lay your paper mask right over your first stamping. Then I'm going to go to the other end like this. And then you stamp halfway on the paper and halfway onto your background. Then when you pull that back,
sure,
it appears to be behind it.
Really tell the difference. This looked okay, but this definitely looks dimensional. So basically, this is called our mask.
Right.
And this.
And you can go on again and lay it over this one, and we can stamp another one.
Well, let's
and you
do
can go on and on.
So we lay it down.
Right.
And we're going to cross our
off.
Okay.
Right.
And that white piece that you've left on, that's basically just
to hold on
it.
to. Right. Another little trick that you can use is to stamp it on like a Post-it note that has the sticky back onto it, and stamp it on there and cut it out like this, and then you don't have to hold it. You can lay it down here and it'll stay in place by itself.
Just the gummy part. That looks great. You have an example of another mask that you cut out here. I just want to show so people really get the idea that you stamped it, then you cut out part of it, and then you have this part merely
to hold on
to. And as you were saying, here's the card where we can see.
It looks like a giraffe walking behind the elephant.
And then the elephant. So obviously we can do this with different stamps. We don't have to just do one stamp.
Exactly. And like you could just as easily have had this pottery here and put your mask down and stamp a teddy bear behind it. And
well, why don't we do this? Put the mask down there, and I'll put
something else.
Parrot, maybe?
Okay.
I don't know. Why not? A rabbit walking next to it.
Right.
So you have, where'd we put our
oh,
there it
mask.
is. Okay.
All right. We'll lay that right over it.
I'm going to use a rabbit. I'm going to use this over here. Are we ready? This is fun. Okay, and just on the edge.
Right.
So we might be covering up his little face, but
right.
we'll see what happens.
It's fun to experiment.
There he is.
See how he's
that
behind
is fun. Once again, experimenting on our piece of paper before we go to our note card.
Exactly.
Okay, well that's
Another
fun.
thing to remember too is save these up. Get like a photo album or something, and it takes a little time to cut out some of these because they might have an intricate design. Save them up so that later when you're making cards and you need a mask, you just look through your photo album and they're already cut out.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. If you're going to keep the stamp, you can keep the mask for the same stamp.
Right.
Okay,
and use it
very
over and over
good.
again.
Now let's go to this beautiful one. I love the glitter. How do we get that?
Okay, that's glitter glue.
Glitter glue.
Right. Now, it comes in a lot of different colors. This particular one is clear. And if you're using that over something that you've stamped in the rainbow colors, see how it'll add a little sparkle to this? But it doesn't cover up the color underneath.
Here, do this one because it's so dark. I imagine that if you've got dark colors, specifically this light
it's really pretty.
glitter
And you
will
can
really
put the
show.
glitter anywhere you want. It could be on the edge, it could be all over the design.
Here
It
I have
just
an example of a
enhances.
stamp that you've made.
Right, and the entire thing. Now that was done with this, which you don't see through this glitter. This one you do.
Okay, so this is green and it will be green.
Right, everything will be green on that.
Well, we want to show another example of using that glitter glue that is so
See,
pretty.
that's done on black, where it really stands out on that.
And once again, that is stamped first, and then this just enhances
And that
it.
just enhances it.
Okay, now here you have two cards. This is the one we looked at in the beginning.
Right,
And
with your light and dark stamping.
Light and dark stamping.
Right.
Now this is similar, but you can see
two
that
things.
the colors are different. Okay, what's the difference?
Well, we did light and dark stamping still, but we also colored directly onto the stamp. Now you notice that here you've got blue on the flower, but you also have it on this leaf up here. On this one, you have green up here. So you're putting color exactly where you want it on here. We want only the flower to be blue and the rest of it to be green.
All right, so you're going to show us how we can be even more precise about our stamping.
Okay, we start with a clean stamp.
Okay.
And these are called brush markers. They're very wet markers, which means you can take your time putting the color exactly where you want on the stamp, and we'll do that. Okay, see how you can, they're called brush markers because they have a real broad area on there that you can brush across the surface of this.
So just color it in. Boy, you could get
You can do
very
that.
detailed that way.
And as many colors as you want. Okay, now for the...
Do these stay wet pretty long?
Quite a while.
Okay.
It would depend upon your conditions too. If you were outside in the sunlight, they might dry faster. Okay, now when we stamp that, you can see the color is right exactly where you wanted it to be.
Okay.
Where our other rainbow effect, you can still get some interesting effects there, but you might have blue down into the stem.
So this
I
has
don't
much more
want.
control by using our
Exactly.
markers instead.
Exactly.
All right, now this one I love. What do we call this?
Those are called pop-ups.
Pop-ups, and we started
And
out like this.
Yes, you start with, it's best to do this on heavy cardstock,
All right.
because if you want this little thing to be like for a name
Tag or
yeah, or something like that, and you want it to be able to stand up on a table, real weak paper that's very thin is just going to fall.
All right.
So we're starting with cardstock like this, heavy cardstock, and you take a ruler and find where the middle point is on here and mark it, then fold it, create a fold line like this. Then we're going to take our ink. Okay, make sure you stamp it right in the middle of the fold line like this.
Okay.
And we'll stamp another one below it, like that. Then, and this is important too, if you have some cardboard around or something like that, lay that down first, then take your piece of paper up there like that. And you want to take an X-Acto knife and cut only on the upper part of this design.
So
Anything that's above the fold line.
All right. Well, that's obviously an easy design to be able to cut out.
Right, right.
Maybe for our first time we can use an easier
Right.
design. We have some examples of some of the other ones that you've done.
Okay. And then
Ah, there it is.
the top
Looks
will pop
great.
up. And that's why we call that the pop-ups.
As I said, that we have the bear
Right.
example and the pig
Now we have
example.
other things over there.
And the pumpkins, you colored those in afterward?
Right. Now that was done with the markers.
Okay.
It was stamped in black first and then colored in with the markers.
Okay, very good. So that's the pop-up.
All right.
Now, we have this.
Right.
And what do you call
And
this?
those are called pop-outs.
These are neat.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And it usually works best with like a butterfly design or something where you're doing it on both sides. But you can use it on a design like this, but you would just cut half of the design. Because if you went all the way around, it would just drop off your
Okay.
design. So see how when you pull it out, it just gives dimension to your cards.
So basically, we're doing the same thing as the pop-up, but let's say we were doing it on this card, we would just cut out half of this.
You could do
and then
that
it
on
would
the
pop
lower
up.
part as well.
Or
Exactly.
on the lower part. Okay, you have another example?
Yes, now here's the butterfly. Like I'm saying, this technique is especially good with the butterfly. Now this has been stamped on there, and because you have a middle that's going to stay on there like that, you can cut around this, you know, with your X-Acto knife and cut. I've already cut this so we can see it. And now you're going to pull both sides out.
Oh, I see what you mean about both sides.
Right,
Okay.
because there's a middle on there that you're not cutting, that keeps it from falling off of the card.
Oh, yeah. I suppose we could do that with
And-
any design.
Most designs. Now, if you did
Just
that
about.
with that, the dolphins there, it would look kind of strange.
Well, that's true.
You know, you
That's
just have to
true.
experiment with
Just
different
decide
things.
with your
But there's
design.
many designs you could do that with. A bird, you could do just the wing coming out. A lot of things like that.
Now we have an example over there of the piece of pottery. It's a
Right,
larger
a large one.
and just pulled out the edge of it.
pull out there. And
Just a little dimension,
it
make it
gives dimension,
special.
right.
Now these cards that we're using, the outline was already on them. I want to make sure that everybody understands
Right.
that we take just a regular card like this,
Exactly. It's already got the gold outline on it, and they come in silver also.
and we've just been doing that to make these
Right.
cards. Okay, now our final one
Okay.
is
And
this. I
building
love
a
this.
little scene taking a stamp, instead of just stamping one or two on something, you're actually creating a little scene there that's humorous in this case.
Skeletons look like they're dancing out, and this is just one stamp.
That's just one stamp,
but we've moved
along with the jumbo pottery stamp, and it looks like he's jumping up out of there. Now I'm going to show you some other techniques here. This is along the same line of doing your building with a little scene out of that. Let's do it upside down so that we've got green here, so we're going to make it look like the trees are down in the green area. And you stamp one, and go back, stamp another one.
Oh, I see.
Okay, and then we'll do one more up here, like this. Then we'll take our little, this one here.
Balloons.
Hot air balloons.
Oh,
and
yes, I like that.
And if that was a birthday card, you can just stamp happy birthday on there.
That's great. Well, I'm going to make my own scene over there with this one.
All right.
And I suppose I could have a whole herd of cows coming across. And boy, you can't get creative when you start combining different stamps. Okay, this is the one I want. And there, clouds. It's a cloudy day for the clouds. Well, this is great. I could see doing this with the kids.
Right.
Here, creating all kinds of scenes. Good. Well, we have some great ideas that you've shared with us. So why don't we review one more time all of the different techniques we can use. The light and dark, the overlap stamping, embellishing with glitter glue, coloring the stamps with brush markers, and then don't forget the pop-ups, the pop-outs, and creating a scene. And now let's move on to embossing. This adds a really elegant touch to your cards and letters. Even the most ordinary paper will look special with embossed images. Vesta, I love this embossing.
It's really exciting.
It is. Let's first make sure everyone knows what we're talking about here. You can see how the image it's raised and it's shiny, and this was a stamp.
That's
and you're going to show us how we're going to do this.
First of all, we need to explain the type of ink we're using. And we're going to use embossing ink, which is especially for embossing. In other words, if you stamp this ink on paper, it has no color. It's very wet and sticky. It's real slow drying because it needs to be slow drying for the powder. Okay?
So we have our embossing ink.
Embossing ink is what we're using here. And we're going to do this big jumbo stamp. Now, remember, we want to get plenty of ink on it.
And this is a pad that had no colored ink.
This was a dry pad, and then you can get the refill of embossing ink to make your own pad. It also comes in this size here, which is a little kit, and you would use that for your regular size stamps. But for those who are going to be using jumbo stamps, it's better to buy this one because you can use little stamps on it, as well as your jumbo. Okay, so we get that inked really well. Then you stamp it on your paper. Press really hard all over. Then you put that down. And we'll stamp a little greeting on here.
Now see, we can't even hardly see what that is. That's because
you can
the
see
ink
the
is
wetness.
clear.
And it takes a long time to dry, so you've got plenty of time to put this on. See how it's sticking to the ink? Okay, we'll make sure it gets on everything. Then you want to tap off the edges. It's important to have really clean hands when you start with embossing because it'll even stick to fingerprints if your fingers are really oily. Okay, then you want to shake it off, blow off any excess that might be on the background. Then there's different heat sources you can use. You can either use a hot plate like this and hold the image over that. You can use a heat gun. People have even done this with an iron. But it just needs to be over the heat source.
So just
now you can see it starting to melt.
Look at it change in the happy birthday. Isn't that fun? And what temperature do we need this to be on?
I set it on the high setting because it's quicker that way.
Oh, that's great. Look at that.
And you can see.
I've done one in silver here. I've already stamped it, and I've already put the powder on. How long can we leave this before we put it over the heat source?
hours.
So we could do a
Yeah.
whole series of cards
right.
and then
You could stamp 20 of them.
heat them all at once.
Put all your powder on at once and then go back and do this.
That's great.
And you know it's completely finished when the whole image looks shiny. You notice it's dull before you melt it. See, you can see that.
Oh.
So you have just a little there at the
There
bottom.
go my paws.
And there they are.
This is wonderful. It does give it such a professional look.
It's really beautiful with it.
So these are the embossing powders and the
Right.
embossing ink. Now, we have
And you
something
want to
else show
save
us.
all this excess and put it back into the jar like that. And each jar like this will do hundreds of images with that.
Oh.
If you don't spill it and you keep putting it back in. Okay, now let's explain the embossing pen. This has really slow drying ink in this as well. So there's ways that you can embellish your cards with this.
Okay.
Okay, now let's say you want to take and stamp this little guy on here.
It's a koala bear on a skateboard.
Right. And first of all, let's go ahead and put the powder on there so that we can, since we're working on a black piece of paper, you can't see them too good.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll melt that. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our embossing pen and make it look like he's skateboarding down a hill.
Okay, so the embossing pen has the embossing ink, which we were just
Right.
using inside it.
Exactly.
So it works the same, but it's a pen. I just love
Right.
watching that
Isn't
change.
that fun?
It is.
Okay, now you take your pen and just draw on a little hill like this.
That's amazing.
Okay,
I'll believe it when I see it.
there it is. You could draw grass on there if you wanted. You could draw a little saying on there, like he's saying something.
Gosh, you could handwrite invitations in your own handwriting if you
Exactly.
have good handwriting.
And it looks, a lot of people use this for calligraphy.
Oh, so many ideas.
There's just so many
Look
things
at
you can
that.
do.
That's wonderful.
And you could go on and embellish more if you want. Like you could do little dots in the sky, make them look like stars. You could, if that's a real work of art, you could sign your name.
Oh, I like, yeah, emboss your name on that. I
Emboss
like
your
that.
name.
Now, let's just take a look at this example because I think you're using different techniques here.
Right. Now this is called sponge embossing here. And we used, do you remember we talked about the color box inks?
Right.
And the one real advantage that they had is they were really slow drying inks, which is perfect for embossing. Because the dye base ink, if you stamp that and you set it aside and try to put powder on it, it has already dried too fast. This gives up to an hour or so before you have to put the powder on, and it'll stick to it.
So we were talking about our
So-
rainbow colors that we were using
Right,
before.
right. And
Okay.
also, you see the colors show up on here?
Right. How do you
They're
do
very subtle on here, but you can see them.
the purple and the blue?
Right, and that is the color box inks here, which are the pigment ink. And it's so thick and sticky that it will show up on there. No other type of ink will show up on black paper other than the
Can you show us what you're
pigment
talking
ink.
about just on
Sure.
using a stamp and a
Right.
corner of that? Can we maybe use these feet?
Let's see.
Will they work
Oh yeah, sure. it
for
will.
doing this?
Yes, it
So I like
will.
those, and they're a nice thick image,
Right.
so we'll get
It's going to
plenty
be
of
very
color.
subtle.
Okay.
But when you sponge it on, it really goes on thick. So, should we use it on here? Or?
Yeah, just on the
we're just
corner, I
showing.
think.
Okay. Okay, then we're going to use a clear powder.
All right.
Now, if you put the gold powder over there, you're going to end up with gold footprints. But
This is
this is going to emboss, but it's going to let the color show through.
okay. So that's
It
clear
looks white
powder.
right now. Okay.
And we use
No.
the colors underneath,
Right.
and that's how we get that
It's
effect.
going to be very subtle, but
Well, sometimes we like that
Yeah.
subtlety, especially on bare
Right.
feet.
yeah, this is very,
Yeah,
very
you can
subtle.
see it.
but
Well, again, and here's a
anyway.
good example of it, basically,
Right.
but that's the technique.
This went on a little bit thicker because we were using a sponge.
Okay.
And,
Natural sponge. And did you use the embossing pen for
right.
this?
Now after it's all finished, then you can go back and border it with your embossing pen. Just draw ragged edges like that. The pottery was put on there, and then these little sticks were just drawn on.
Okay.
You could draw
So
anything you wanted.
how do we do more than one color of
Okay.
embossing powder?
I'll show you that next.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Here, while you set
Remember
that
to
up,
keep putting these back in.
I want to show
Saving it.
this one because this, if you can see, has some silver here and some gold here. So you've got gold and silver throughout the whole picture. And that's what Vesta is going to show us next.
Okay. Now, I hope that'll fit in there. Okay, we'll do this fish.
Okay.
Something that looks good with color. There again, we want to move it all around to get plenty of that on there. Okay.
So we've seen gold, we've seen silver, we've seen clear,
Right.
but they come in all different colors.
A lot of people ask, can you put more than one color on at once?
Mhm.
And you can. You want to have little papers all ready for yourself there. Now we're going to put a little bit of green. Okay, let's set that aside right now. And we'll do a little bit of orange. And you always want it going away from you like that so it doesn't get on areas that you don't want to cover.
Mhm.
Okay.
Use the pink next.
Okay, now we're going to turn it over.
Pink.
Oh, pink, yeah.
Just because I love that color.
Okay.
It's
put
so
that
bright.
near the
Look at
orange.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
That's a good
Oops.
one.
Okay, and what haven't we?
Blue.
The blue.
Blue looks good.
Okay. The reason why we're doing different papers is so you can put it back in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they'll mix together. Now, with the last color, you can kind of go over the whole thing, and it'll get any little areas that you missed.
Ooh, that is
Okay.
great. Okay.
Now you just heat it, and this is going to look real glossy when we get it done.
This is
I don't
wonderful.
know if we have that on
Now,
high.
could you have done just the green section, then heated it,
No.
then put the oh, you
Well,
can't do it
what
that
would
way.
happen is you're heating it and it's making that ink dry,
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Okay.
which might
Okay.
speed up
oh,
the drying
that's
of that.
wonderful.
Now you can see a little bit of the glossy area.
This is fun. All right, I want to show
So it's
everybody all of
exciting.
these different things that you have done using these techniques. So let's just go through these, and you can tell us how you did them.
All right.
This was the stamps.
Right.
Okay.
And this is an embossing powder called White Sparkle,
Mm,
which
that's
looks really
great.
nice
Here,
on
I'm
there.
gonna go like
But we
this.
stamped the two stamps on there, then took the embossing pen, drew a line right at the base of those,
Mhm.
and then the little stars were done with just dotting the sky,
It's great.
and then put the powder
This
on.
is beautiful. Look at
Okay,
this.
now this is a trifold card,
Mhm.
and this was, went all the way to the bottom.
Mhm.
But put the stamp on there, emboss it, and then use the markers to color them in.
Oh, so
Remember
this
how
is
we
just the-
marked on the stamp?
just the
This is
purple and the
filling
green.
in the area afterwards, and it even has a little glitter glue on there to add sparkle.
It's beautiful.
The edge of this was done with the embossing pen to add gold to the edge of that. And then we took scissors and cut it out.
Okay, here's another similar example.
Same way with that. This was embossed in gold, and this was done with the embossing pen on the edge, colored in with markers, and then just take scissors and cut it out.
Boy, that
Gives
is
dimension.
every bit as beautiful as if we went to a store and bought
Right.
it. And some more quick examples here of just using the silver
Now
and the
that
gold.
had, the same way we did the fish, where you put a little bit of one color on and then some of the other. This is sponge embossing here, which we haven't actually done yet. I'll have to show you that method.
Let's show us now.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. Okay. How about
This
if
is
we just
using
take...
a sponge.
All right, we'll do this really quick.
Okay.
Or do we have any black? Maybe we'll do that on black.
Here, we could
Okay.
do it on the back of here. Do it on my paw.
Oh, okay. All right. Then we take a piece of paper and put it across it. Let's see, we kind of need one that's longer, but that's all right.
Okay.
We'll just put some on there. Then it's good to take some of this ink, put it on your pad like too much on there, and
A glob
dab it.
of it.
Right.
Okay.
And then just go along and dab that on.
Okay.
Might want to just kind of intermittently put it on there. And we'll take that gold here. And there again, you could mix it. You could put gold and silver. Okay. And Put it over the heat source again.
So the sponge just gives it a different kind of a look.
Right, it gives it a totally different look, and you're not using a stamp in that case. Your sponge is your stamp. Let's see how it's turning again.
Has anyone ever tried to do this over a toaster?
Yes, it gets very hot, and that works very well too. So really, any heat source you have around your house, if it's thin enough paper, you can do it over a light bulb.
Oh, I'll be darned.
So, but if you're in a hurry, the other works. Now you can see that edge that was put on there. Another thing too, we talked about the stationery that already had the gold around it like that. Of course, if you do something embossed in here with gold, it looks really fabulous. But another thing you can do is take a template and lay it down. If you had a template that was round or an oval or whatever, you can take your embossing pen, mark around in there, and put your own borders on cards and letters too.
I want to show this one.
Okay.
Because it's dimensional. How did you do that?
Okay, first it was stamped on the stationery and embossed, colored in with the markers. Then we made this on a separate piece of paper, embossed it, colored it in, and cut it out, and then glue on only the center of the flower like that, and it gives it dimension too.
And I want to show this because we don't have to just make cards using this.
You can use it for anything.
Look at how pretty this is. Now you've done the same idea of cutting out some and
some are embossed right directly onto the mat board, and then some pieces are cut out and put on.
And we don't have to use it just on paper.
Right.
We have some examples of embossing on wood also.
Exactly. A lot of people say, well, can you put it on something heavy or thicker than paper? And you can. You can emboss on wood. We have a little wooden box there that was embossed, colored in.
How do you heat it then?
Then, I'll show you. There's a couple of different ways. You can use a heat gun like this, which makes it very easy. You don't have to hold it over a heat source. But if you are putting it on your stove, let's say it was this, then instead of holding it this way like we did and watching it heat, then you would put it this way, and the heat doesn't have to travel through the wood.
Okay.
And the same thing with mat board. It's better to turn it the other way, and it'll heat
it on top instead of underneath.
Exactly.
Wow, these are great ideas.
Really
what
fun,
a lot of fun this is going to be now that I know how to do this.
Right.
Thank you. And we've tried to give you lots of ideas along with these instructions. And I'll tell you what, we could go on all day. But we still want to show you fabric stamping and shrink plastic. So let's move on to the next section. In this segment, we're going to show you 3 different ways to decorate fabrics with stamps. The first method will be stamping right onto the fabric. The second will be stamping with color box inks and sealing them to the fabric with clear embossing powder. The third method will be stamping designs on paper with fabric transfer ink and then ironing them onto the fabric. So let's first start with the basics.
Okay. Now, when you're working on fabric, you want to wash them first. Like if it's a t-shirt, you want to wash the sizing out of it.
Okay.
Even if you were working on like this or this, you want to wash it first to get all the sizing out of it.
Any kind of fabric, okay.
And then the next thing, this is permanent ink, so we can't make any mistakes.
All
okay?
right.
Okay, so remember how we said always practice on paper first. You always want to practice on paper. Now, after you ink this, now there again we're working with a jumbo stamp on a jumbo pad. You can buy these where they're empty, and then put your fabric ink on it. And now we're going to make sure it's well inked. And see how a little bit on there? So you would want to make sure when you're getting ready to do it on here that it has plenty of ink on it.
On the whole thing.
Okay. Now before we do that, I've made some paper cutouts of these where I have stamped onto the fabric, onto the paper, and then cut them out because you may want to decide where you want to put your design first.
Okay.
Okay, we're doing this.
Now, do we need to put something underneath or
yes,
inside of our shirt?
Yes, that's another thing too. I have a piece of plastic in here, but you can put paper, whatever. Most people are used to using a shirt board.
Right, that we can buy in the store.
Right. We don't want to use that when we're stamping onto the fabric.
Okay.
And the reason for that is it's cardboard, and it's not really a flat surface again. The cardboard has little grooves in it. So when you're stamping it, you may miss areas.
Okay. So this will make sure we have a hard surface.
We want to work on a flat surface,
all right,
smooth
and
surface.
This is where we want our
so
design.
let's say we're going to do that with it. This gives you an idea. If you don't like it, you haven't already stamped on your shirt.
Okay.
So, okay. Now, the next thing.
Make sure we get all that ink on there.
Right. You can leave the papers there if you don't remember where you were putting it. You could do that too. But, okay. Let's try to get this well inked. We're going to stamp on one. And you want to work quickly with this ink because if you leave it, if you just stand there with this, this will start to dry. It's very fast drying.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
In a way, I suppose that's good because then if we're working, we don't have to worry about it
you can start
smudging.
You can immediately begin to paint on it.
Okay.
Okay, let's stamp another one. Okay.
Good.
Now these light areas we're going to be covering with paint, so it doesn't really matter.
But we have our basic idea of what the stamp looks like, where it goes.
Right. Okay. Now we'll stamp another one. Okay. Now we've got our pattern on there. Okay. Now we're going to start with the paint and cover up these areas.
This is regular fabric paint.
Yes.
Is this dimensional paint that we're using?
This is dimensional.
Okay.
This is silver pearl that we're outlining this with. And we're going to go over all the black areas of the shell.
So basically our stamp is like a guide for us.
Exactly.
As if we had traced in a picture beforehand.
Exactly.
And now we just have to cover
Now
it in.
you're doing that and you fill in all the areas of black with this.
Okay.
Okay. Now we can pull that off.
And show our next one. Here we can see that you've covered in all of the areas with our dimensional paint.
Exactly. Now we're going to take, this is a paint that's especially for dark fabrics that we're going to put on next. Then we're going to go back in these areas and just dab on some color in there.
And now we have it on a shirt board. It's okay when we're painting, just like painting as we're probably used to doing anyway, painting a shirt.
Exactly.
So the plastic or the paper was just for our stamping step.
Just for the stamping stage, because you always want to work on a smooth, flat surface.
I like that idea of using the stamps as our outline or our design because there's so many adorable stamps out there. And if I were going to go and try to just freehand it with the paint or a pencil or something, there's no way I could get
this way, anybody
picture
can
like
be
that.
an artist.
Yeah.
You pick out any stamp you want.
Great.
And you can make a matching birthday card if you're making a shirt for somebody. Emboss them a card with the same stamp.
Oh.
And give them as a set.
Yeah, I like that. Now, here, let's show everyone our finished shirt. And there it is. Very simple. We can see how quickly we can do that.
just embellish this with doing that. You can go on and...
We could put some glitter in here, glitter paint.
Put rhinestones on there.
Gosh.
You can spray it with webbing spray.
All right.
A lot of different things.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other ideas that you have here.
Okay.
We'll pull this
You don't
off.
have to work on only T-shirts. You could do pot holders, napkins. This is a telephone book. With all the recycling, people are using their own bags to go in and shop with those, so you can personalize those.
And on the picture frame there, that was a stamp that you put on, and again, we should just keep in mind that the stamp is a guide for us to then use the paint on top of that.
Right.
And they turn out so nice. And this color in here, that's done with a webbing paint.
Right, it was sprayed on. And another thing we should go over real quickly too is we use black ink on this, and most light colored fabrics you can use the black. If you want to use, the black ink, and if you want to use stampings on dark colored shirts like black or navy blue, then you would use white fabric ink for that.
And it would be the same process.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you need permanent cleaner, permanent ink cleaner to take the ink off of the stamp.
And what is this ink called again?
It's permanent fabric ink.
Okay, well this is obviously quick and easy. Let's go through the basics one more time. Always wash and dry your fabric first. Work on a smooth, flat surface. Put a layer of paper under the fabric and inside the shirts to prevent bleed through. Do not use cardboard inserts while you're stamping. You can use that cardboard shirt form later when you're painting. Test the stamp on the paper first to be sure that the stamp is properly inked. Check the manufacturer's instructions for special consideration if they're cotton or synthetic. Wash in cool or warm water. Avoid hot wash. Do not use bleach or detergents with bleach. Now this is a solvent-based ink. It's very quick drying. Use a solvent-based stamp cleaner for cleanup. On light fabrics, paint over it with soft paints, tint paints, transparent paints. Use dimensional paints to outline the designs. Then on dark fabrics, you can stamp designs with white ink. On dark fabrics, use opaque paints specifically designed for dark fabrics. Cool or warm wash, cool rinse, no bleach. Now, Vesta, we've cleared off the table so you can show us fabric stamping with color box ink.
Normally, this ink would wash out of fabric, but what we're going to do is emboss it with a clear powder, and that seals it to the fabric and makes it permanent.
Okay.
Okay?
So this is the pigment ink.
Right. Remember, it was slow drying. We did it in our other segment. Okay. Now, first of all, you want to wash and dry your fabric just like you did with the permanent ink. And now remember, we always test stamp to make sure it's stamping good. Okay. Then you stamp right onto the fabric.
That's pretty.
And you have about 5 minutes before you need to get the powder on. So depending on what size fabric you're using, you want to stop. If you have a shirt that has a lot of detail, then you want to cover up some of it, then come back and put more on it. Okay? Now, you just shake it off the same way you did
just
the
like
paper.
we did with the embossing.
Right. Okay. Then I'm going to use a heat gun here, although you could use an iron. But okay. Now, as soon as this looks bright, you know that it's finished. See how that's turning darker? Okay. You just go through. It takes about 200 degrees to melt this. Okay. Turn that off.
That was quick.
Okay. Now that's permanent on there.
Oh.
And you don't feel it raised like you do on the card. What it's done there is it's just gone into the fibers and bonded that so that it won't come off and makes it permanent.
So we can use the same kind of ink pad that we were using on our paper.
Right.
It's the pigment ink, but we need to use that embossing powder so that it will stay.
Exactly. And what's fun about this ink too is that you can stamp on your fabric, and let's say you messed up or it didn't come out clear or whatever, you can wash it out before embossing it.
So do I have to wash it out within 5 minutes like
No,
you were saying before?
no.
I can see, and
Since
throw it
it's
in my
a water
washing machine.
cleanup ink, you can take your time, throw it aside, and then clean it later.
Well, all kinds of possibilities
So,
that we can use with that. Let us
very
review
simple.
once again about fabric stamping with color box inks. The color box inks normally wash out, but can be sealed to fabric with the clear embossing powder. Wash and dry the fabric, stamp color box ink directly onto the fabric. Color box ink is thick and it's slow drying. It can be used with jumbo stamps. Apply embossing powder within 5 minutes of stamping that fabric. Shake off the excess powder. Then a heat gun is the easiest to use. The powder melts at approximately 200 degrees. Washing instructions: normal wash, use a low dryer setting, avoid ironing on the embossed design. It's not permanent before sealing. If you don't like the design, you can just wash it out and start over again. Vesta, now you're going to show us how we can make our own iron-on transfers to use on fabric.
That's right. With this Stampin' Iron ink, you can stamp onto paper and then iron it onto fabric.
Okay, how do we do that?
Okay, you just do it like you do any other stamping. You're just going to stamp onto paper like that. You let it dry 5 or 10 minutes before you iron it on. And I'm going to show you here, too, how different the color looks after it's ironed.
Okay, so basically what we're doing is using this special kind of ink.
And stamping on paper.
And then stamp on paper, and that is like the transfers that we can buy in the store and iron on.
Right, but with a variety of stamps, you can make any design you want.
Okay, so show us how that works.
Okay, and it works best if you use it on real thin paper. You can use any kind of paper, thick, heavy, whatever. But the nice thing about using this is you can see your design, so it makes it easier for placing it just where you want to place it on a shirt. Okay, you just set it down like that. You don't want it to move, so you want to hold it there for about 15 seconds.
So the basic instructions that you would use whenever you're using an iron-on
Right.
transfer, you don't want to move the paper.
You don't want to move it because
Okay.
then your ink will move around. And what I do is still hold the piece of paper like that and lift it up and see if it, now see that, I like it a little bit deeper than that.
Okay.
So now we can go back, hold it a little bit longer.
What's your setting on the iron?
It's the high heat,
Okay.
but you don't want any steam at all. Because the steam, there's a couple of things that it does. It makes it not be a distinct pattern on there, and also you'll see the little steam holes.
So we really don't need steam anyway
No.
for it.
Okay, there you go.
Oh,
See how
and
perfect
there
that
it
is?
is.
Now here you can see the difference of the way it looks on paper and the way it looks on the fabric.
Sure. Now,
So-
we're doing this on a magazine. Why
Yes,
is
you want to
that?
have some give to it. If you do it on the flat surface, it may not hit the fabric properly. Or this way, it's going to give it a little bit of bounce.
And what kind of fabric do we want to use for this?
It works the best on 50-50 blend. You don't have to do anything. It's ready to go. If you do this on a shirt and it's been washed again, that's another point that we want to always remember.
So wash it before we even
Wash
do this.
it ahead of time and dry
Okay.
it and iron it on, and on a 50-50 blend, it's finished.
Oh,
Now, you can use it on 100% cotton, but you have to put this clear extender over it to make sure that it won't wash out.
okay. Now we want to take a look at this example. Now, how did you do this? What is this, the iron-on part?
Yes, first the shirt was tie-dyed, and then we used the little leaves and things on there are stamps, and they were stamped onto paper and then ironed on.
Okay.
And
Now
they
we're
were
going to
embellished.
show a real shirt here, so we'll
Right.
clear this
We've made
away
our
and
own-
pull this over.
Should I stamp another, or iron another color on there?
Let's do that.
Okay, need that magazine a minute. And here's another color. We'll just put it on there.
Just to show.
So you
all
could do
different
a lot of
colors
different
then.
colors. You could stamp a whole bunch of them and put them on there. And what's great about this too, and especially for children, is if they're stamping on paper and say they just didn't get the design just right, it doesn't matter, just throw it away. You're not having to put it onto the fabric.
Right, throw the paper.
Just throw it away.
We want to make sure that we're using the Stampin' Iron ink for this. We
Right.
want to make that clear that this isn't just regular ink that we have been using. It's special
Exactly.
ink
Exactly.
that makes this work.
So now
Oh,
you can
there
see
it
there. Now you have yellow.
is. That's
So you
fun.
can
Those
even
are bright colors.
you can even lay it over the color that's already on there and get some unusual effects too.
Okay, now we're going to show the big one here that
Right.
you've already stamped this.
Right.
Our fish and
Exactly.
little
I've done
twigs.
the fish in black, and the little leaves are done in red or pink, I think it was. And then after we iron it, we're going to use fabric paint to paint over the fish
Oh,
to add more color.
so we have a
So-
newspaper under here.
Right, to thicken it. And let's see, well, we'll just place it like that.
Okay, I'll help you hold it.
Okay.
So is there any chance of scorching the shirt if you've got that on a high heat?
Not if you just stay on the paper like this.
Okay.
Okay. And like I said, this is really great for kids, although you want to supervise the ironing part of it,
Sure.
but it lets them design anything they want. And it's just unlimited, the designs that you can come up with.
Yeah, I like that idea. And then for them, it will look so professional.
Right.
You know, sure, they can draw on their own pictures if they want to use the fabric paint, but doing something like this, they can feel like they've really done it.
Now, see your
look at
design?
that. Isn't that wonderful? Good.
And like if this was the 100% cotton, you would just take this clear extender and take your paintbrush and
And then
paint
this
right
will-
over your design.
Just go over. Does it matter the thickness that you use, or
Of the
just
paint?
so you have some of it?
No,
on
what's
there?
wonderful about it is that you don't have to go over every little delicate line. Go like this, because when it dries, you don't see it on the shirt at all. So you
just
can quickly
Get
do
it
this
on there. Okay.
on there like that.
And then would we paint on top of
And
that
then
if we
you would,
wanted
like
to?
the fish, you could use different colors on there and make it blended looking and go farther with it, or leave it like that if you like it.
All right, now we have to show one other idea. I love this idea, Vesta. Now, we'll show what you've done.
Okay.
First of all,
We've made a card using these little bunnies, and the stars were stamped on using the Stampin' Iron ink. And you're going to send this as a birthday card to somebody and tell them inside that it's an iron-on transfer. So after they get the card, they can recycle it by just cutting out the design.
Just cut out the, and you wouldn't use the happy birthday, but just cut that out.
You can even leave that on because this part was stamped with ink that won't transfer.
Oh, so we don't have to cut around it.
We don't really.
It just won't, oh, I see.
Right.
It just won't transfer, nothing will happen.
Exactly.
And look what happened then.
And then just iron it right on there. And
that is so cute. I love that
And
idea.
the thing that's nice about this too, this ink, this could have been stamped and sent to somebody, and let's say they don't iron it on for a year. It doesn't matter.
That's a great idea. This is wonderful ink. Now I want to show that also with these are these little bunny buttons, but we are going to be showing you that coming up in just a few moments, how we can have a complete gift. But first of all, let's review what we've just learned about this kind of ink. The Stamp and Iron, wash fabric first, work on a flat surface. Two things to remember. Now, use any paper. Thin papers make placement easy. It works best on 50-50 fabrics. It's okay on 100% cotton, but you have to seal it with that clear extender. Now the color changes between when it's stamped and then when it's ironed, so keep that in mind. You want to wait 5 to 10 minutes to dry it before ironing. Remember, use high heat, no steam, and use pressure. It can clean up the stamps with water. Now wait 24 hours to set before you decide to wash it. Avoid hot wash, use cool or warm wash, no bleach or detergents with bleach. And they're great gifts. You can stamp them now and then iron them later. That concludes the 3 fabric stamping techniques and brings us to the final subject of this video. In the next and last section, we'll show you how to work with shrink plastic. We're going to stamp out all sorts of jewelry, accessories, buttons, and holiday and party items. We've learned how to be creative on papers and fabrics. Now we're going to work on plastic. Vesta, is this the same shrink plastic that's been around for years and years?
Is.
Well, I'll be darned.
Sure
Okay,
is.
how do we do this?
Okay, now we're going to be using a permanent ink that's for non-porous surfaces. Okay, and this is the ink here. It also comes in a little kit like this, and it has the refill bottle so that you can make large pads, so we can use them with our jumbo stamps.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
And it can be used on other surfaces?
It can be used on wood as well, and anything that is a non-porous surface, you could use it on glass, metal, whatever.
Right, but today it's shrink plastic.
Yes, that's what we're going to do here. So, first thing we're going to do when we get our plastic ready is that you want to sand it. You're going to sand the surface lightly like this, and that serves 2 purposes. It keeps your stamp from sliding around on the plastic, and it also gives the surface a tooth, so that if you're coloring them in with colored pencils or whatever, it gives it something to grab hold of.
Okay.
Okay? All right, now first thing we're going to do, that we always do, is test on paper first.
It's a good image.
Okay. It worked out good. There's not too much ink on it. And now we're going to stamp right onto the plastic. Okay, and you can keep stamping straight across. If you want to make 4 buttons, 6 buttons, whatever, you put it on there.
And we can see how many we can get on.
Right, now this is a size, one of the sizes that the sheets come in. And if you stamp them side by side, you can get approximately 40 buttons out of one sheet.
40 buttons on here. Okay,
right.
Inexpensive then.
Right. And now what you would do is color in with colored pencils. See how we're putting that on
Do we want to
there?
just use colored pencils, or can we use something else on this?
You could use paints if you thinned them down and put it on there.
But you
this
recommend
is the easiest way, and we know it's waterproof.
Okay.
So if you're making buttons, you want something that will stand up to water and heat and all that too. So you would just color in whatever areas you want colored in.
Is the color going to stay like that, or does it change when they
Now,
shrink?
when it gets smaller, everything gets intensified. Your stamp is going to be a lot smaller, and the colors are going to get brighter as they get smaller.
Okay, so we'll keep that in mind.
Now, the type of colored pencil I'm using here are soft lead pencils, and that's really important if you want your colors to be bright. You can use regular colored pencils that are hard lead, and they're going to look really pastel on there.
Oh, all right.
So the soft lead is what you're looking for.
Okay.
Prismacolors are really good for this. Okay, then you just use regular scissors to cut out the design. You can see?
So it's just very simple.
Right, so you
cut
just
along the
cut it
edges.
out. You don't have to cut exactly right on the design like that. It can be a little bit farther out from it.
And we have
And then when you get them
couple
all
that are
cut out,
cut.
okay, then if these are going to be buttons, then you want to punch two little holes approximately in the center of the design.
Okay.
Okay?
Small.
I'm using an 1/8-inch hole punch.
Okay.
Okay? A regular hole punch is a 1/4 inch, and that's way too big a holes for sewing on.
Okay.
Okay? Now the next thing we're going to do, we have our oven set at 250 to begin. And ovens vary, so you want to start at that, and you don't want to go any higher than 300 degrees. So we're going to start out at that. Okay, now we're going to use just regular mat board to put our plastic on and to heat. And I'm putting baby powder on it so that the plastic won't stick to it.
Could we use flour?
You could use anything
Regular
that
baby
is,
powder?
yeah,
All right.
cornstarch, baby powder, whatever.
Baking soda.
Baking soda.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to stick these in the oven.
This is the fun part.
Right.
Hopefully you have a window on your oven so you
Right.
can watch it.
And another nice thing about using the mat board is that you don't need a mitt. You can just reach in and pull it in and out, and it doesn't get too hot.
Okay. About how long
Okay.
does this take now?
This takes approximately 5 minutes. If you're using, you're putting in a larger piece, it may take as much as 15 minutes.
Okay.
It just depends.
While those are cooking,
All
let's
right.
take a look at some of the buttons that you've made. Here are the bunny
Okay.
buttons. Believe it or not, what we just did is going to come
Right.
out this small. That's great.
They make good gifts if you sew them onto a little card like that, stick it in an envelope and send it to somebody.
And let's see if they've watched the tape at all. They have seen this
Right.
throughout the
Your
tape.
favorite stamp.
My favorite one. So these are all the regular stamps that we've been using.
Right. For Halloween costumes, you can make little pumpkins like that. For somebody that loves music, you
Music,
could make those
great.
for them.
Okay. And this is the size, that size stamp. There are medium stamp,
Right,
basically,
right.
will come out this small. And here, I've got to show, this is a great idea. These are little cupcake picks,
Right.
toothpick sort of things. You see that?
Let's stick that right in there.
And you just have cut along there.
You would
Just show
stamp
on.
your design on there and then just add
Just
a
cut down?
skinny line, and it's got to be twice the length at least.
Oh, that's right, because
that
it'll
you
shrink
want,
this way also.
because it's going to
Those are
shrink.
adorable.
Right. And things don't, when they come out of the oven, they're going to be laying flat. That's how you know they're done. But you can also work with the plastic after it comes out, but you have to do it quickly because it starts to set up very fast. But you could take your piece out and kind of curve it like that and hold it while it's cooling down, and then you'll have a curved piece.
So is that what you did with this one?
That's what was done with the
Okay.
napkin ring.
Napkin ring.
You can also do weaving with the plastic.
Okay,
So,
let's take a look at that.
Let's say you had an earring design that's going to be like this, and you take your X-Acto knife and cut lines in it, and then have separate pieces of strips of the plastic and weave it in and out, and then put it in the oven like that, and it will shrink
Okay,
tight like
let's
that.
take a look in our oven because I
Let's
can see that
starting
they're
to
curling
curl-
up.
Yes, they're starting to curl now, and since they didn't curl excessively, I'm going to turn this up a little bit.
So if they curl excessively, it's too hot.
Yes, if it did it too fast, you don't want that. But you know they're done when they're laying completely flat.
Okay, so they curl up.
So they curl
and then you
up.
just
This
wait
is
for them-
normal for it to go through this process. A lot of people will say, oh, I put them in the oven and they started curling up. Well, they're supposed to do that.
If we took them out right now, would they stay curled like that?
Yes, they would.
That's kind of a fun idea too, depending on what you want to do
if
with
you were
your
making
jewelry.
earrings and you wanted it to be that
Yeah,
way, you could
kind
do
of
that.
dimensional.
Right.
Okay.
And another thing is they won't shrink if you left it in for 10 minutes and forgot about it. They're not going to keep getting tinier and tinier. They do get to a point, I think it's 40% smaller than what you started with. It's going to stop there. It won't go any farther.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about if you leave it in a little bit longer.
Let's take a look at some of the other things you've done since you mentioned
Right.
we
You can
have
add
earrings.
beads onto them. There again, you would use your hole punch to punch holes and then string on beads.
And here you have one where you have the shrink plastic underneath, and then you made another
And then
design.
to give it dimension.
Do you
And
just
glue that on.
Glue
Yeah.
will work.
Mhm. You can put
Right.
your findings on. You can do jars. There again, you'd want to curve it to fit the jar. So right after you take it out of the oven, you put it against the jar.
And then this is just the webbing paint that you've put around
Right,
that.
to spray
and I
that
want to
on.
show the lid.
And then you could make your favorite homemade salsa and give it to somebody as a gift in there.
I think our bunnies are done.
They're
Do they look
just
like
about
they're
done. Yeah, I think we can take them out now.
Okay.
Okay.
That's amazing. And there they are.
And because, see how they
Ooh,
slid right
yeah,
off?
uh-huh.
If you don't put the powder on, sometimes they'll stick. And this way, they come right off.
And there they are. And this would be
Okay.
the time that we would bend them if we wanted to,
Right.
while it was still just a little warm.
Another thing, now we hand colored those. Now, this is a method that's really easy to do, but you can get acrylic sprays and spray right onto the plastic background before you stamp on it. So in other words, like this one has a two-tone effect. It has some light lavender and then blue and then silver webbing over that.
Oh, that's neat.
Now this butterfly that we did, see how it's got a gradient look on it? Then you would stamp your butterfly onto the plastic now, cut it out, and now we're going to put in a larger piece.
Okay.
And sometimes you can have problems with larger ones. This may not be any problem with this, but you would put that in the
So the
oven the
larger
same way.
stamps sometimes have special problems.
Sometimes they'll curl up really fast
Right.
into itself and not come out again.
Oh, because it gets stuck.
Right.
Okay.
Other times it works great, so we don't know why exactly. So
Well, let's
while
go
that's
over,
doing that,
right, some of the
we
other
have a
things
kit we can show
that
too.
well, let's show some of our products here that
Okay.
you've made.
Now here's a hair comb. You would start with this, which you can buy in a craft supply store. And then when you're taking this piece out, you form it to that before it completely cools off, and then glue it on there, and you got a hair comb.
Okay. Let's take a look at just these pins here, because they're so pretty too. And once again, you have just glued the pin to the back.
Right. And this little cactus thing here,
Mm-hmm.
you notice how it's going in a lot of different directions. It was twisted. That's done by hand afterwards. You can do bracelets. It's curved also.
And here we have just a...
That's
what do you call it?
for a French braid, where you just have one area to stick a comb in.
And those salamanders are also...
Yeah, those were
Are those
done with
images?
stamps and then
Okay.
glued on. This is a t-shirt tie,
Mm-hmm.
their buckle.
And the belt is beautiful. The rose itself,
That's
has
a
been done
stamp.
with this shrink.
Right, and you stamped it on and cut it out. And because it would be too flexible and delicate by itself, we glued it onto this leather.
Many, many ideas. Once again, up here we have a whole grouping of the earrings and the pins. It's nice
Right.
that when you do jewelry like that, it is so light.
Right.
If you have pierced ears,
You
everybody
can't
knows what
even
we're talking
feel
about.
it,
It's
right.
wonderful to have nice light earrings.
It really is.
And to be able to choose your own colors, your own styles, makeup. It's,
You
this
can
is
make it
wonderful.
match your shirt. Since you're using stamps, you can use the same stamp on a shirt and then make matching earrings and then make a matching card and give it to somebody for their birthday or whatever.
Right. These are wonderful ideas, and we can just keep coming up with them, I'm sure.
Right. Okay, now let's see. This I'm going to turn up again slightly. This one didn't curl into itself, but if it did, if it had started to do that, then you could take it out as it's starting to curl in and turn it over and put it back in.
Oh,
And it'll stay flattened out more.
okay. But
And-
we're just waiting for this. Now
Right,
it should
now
be
that won't be,
flattening for us.
yeah, it
Well,
won't
let
be
me
long.
just say that let's show everyone that they can get this shrink plastic in a kit.
Right, you can buy it in a kit which has 6 sheets of the plastic in it. It has the little piece of the 600 grit paper.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to use a real harsh sandpaper because you'd see the lines in it.
Okay.
And then it has complete instructions and problems that might arise, different paints or markers that you can use on them.
Okay.
Explains about the hole punch.
And we also want to let everyone know that there are books on stamping that
Right.
will give them even more ideas.
Right, and complete details that we've covered.
Okay, so it's definitely...
And
this is-
also the plastic comes in single sheets in your craft supply store. You don't always maybe want 6 sheets. After you've learned how to use it, you can go in and individually buy sheets.
This is an example of a larger piece
Right,
that
this
has
one's
been painted.
probably twice the size of the sheet that we were working on
Okay.
for bigger projects.
And let's take a look finally at our
Okay,
butterfly.
it's all done.
And I am amazed at how that large butterfly has turned out to be this size. That's just wonderful. So then our rose from our belt was an example of a large stamp.
It started out large also.
So we have to really keep in mind how small these
You
get.
have to learn to think big.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, these are great ideas. All these kinds of
thank
things that we can do with stamping.
They're really a lot of fun.
So let's review the basics of working on shrink plastic before we wrap this segment up. First of all, read and follow directions carefully. Use the permanent ink only. Use solvent-based cleaner for cleanup. Sand the sheet first if stamping directly on it. Color designs with colored pencils. Use acrylic spray paints for more color. You don't need to sand first if you are spray painting. Use webbing before stamping. Sheets are easy to cut with scissors. Bake at 250 for about 5 minutes. Excessive curling may mean that the oven is too hot, and if pieces are not flat, you can just rebake them. That brings us to the end. We've covered a lot of topics and shown you a lot of techniques.
We hope you've enjoyed our presentation and learned a few things to make your stamping experiences more exciting.